Welcome to the Introduction to Drapery. We could have a video on this topic that would be 60 minutes long, but we're going to try and keep it short and sweet. Drapery is by far one of the most technical, complex, and beautiful products that we offer in the space. However, there are a lot of different features, a lot of different functions, and a lot of things to consider. We're going to break it down and try and simplify it by covering 4 key elements. We're going to talk about opacity, we're going to talk about hardware, we're going to talk about pleat and fullness, and we're also going to talk about fabric types. Let's get into it. Now, when it comes to picking the opacity of a drapery, there's essentially 2 ways of doing it. We can have an unlined drapery or we can have a lined drapery. An unlined drapery, like the ones behind me here, come in a sheer, a semi-sheer, or somewhere in between the middle. So you'll have sheers that are more sheer or more semi-sheer, and you'll have semi-sheers that are more sheer. It really just depends on the weave of the fabric, the type of the material, the way that it's pleated, and a lot of other factors, but that's basically what we're dealing with. With a traditional sheer like this, you're gonna have relatively great daytime privacy, a nice soft glow, and that light ambience in the space. However, in the evening when the lights are on inside the property and it's dark outside, you're not gonna have privacy with this type of material. With a semi-sheer, you're not gonna have as great a view through during the day. You're still gonna have that nice soft glow, but you will have relatively good privacy in the evening when the lights are on inside. Now, keep in mind the type of pleat, the fullness of the fabric, and the distance between the window and the drapery are all gonna also play a factor in how much privacy you're getting in the evening or during the day. When it comes to lined drapery, we can have them polycotton or semi-opaque, we can have them blackout lined, we can even have them thermal lined or acoustic lined. So there's lots of different materials that we can put on the back side of the fabric to achieve a specific function. So with lined draperies, there are a variety of different liners we can use. There's polycotton or light filtering liners, there's blackout liners, there's even something called interliners which sit between the fabric and the back liner to achieve a specific property like sound absorption or thermal control. This fabric that you see behind me actually is the exact same but looks very different because one has a blackout liner, the other has a light filtering or polycotton liner. The type of lining that we use on a project can even be a specific color or material to the street side. So it's not just as simple as saying, I want a light filtering or a blackout liner, but what are the properties of that liner and how does it look to the exterior? Like many other products, the actual color of the material will also impact both the light transference as well as the privacy of a drapery. It's important to not just think about a material being sheer, semi-opaque, or blackout, but also to think about the actual color of that material, especially when we're working with sheers. Now that we've explored some of the different types of opacities, let's take a look at some of the different header or pleat style options and fullness of a drapery. The next essential feature of drapery is the header or pleat style option. To keep things simple, let's think about it in 2 different camps. There's pinch pleats and there's ripple folds. Within pinch pleats or pleated style drapery, there are a variety of different styles. Top and bottom tack, 2-finger, 3-finger, even pleat, goblet pleats, lots of different options. With ripple fold, there are a variety of different ways that we can change the look of the drapery. The fullness, which applies to both pleats and ripple fold, we'll talk about that in a minute, and the snap spacing or the depth of the folds themselves. So when it comes to the pleated style, like I mentioned, there are a variety of different looks. On display in the showroom, we have a few of them. There's lots more. We have a 3-finger top and bottom tack here. We have a 3-finger bottom tack here. We have a goblet pleat, and then we have a 2-finger top tack and a 2-finger bottom tack. The fullness or the volume is also something that we need to consider when we're looking at drapery. It applies to both pinch pleat and ripple fold. Ripple fold goes from 40 all the way up to 200% fullness. Now keep in mind, in both ripple fold and pinch pleat, the more voluminous or the more fullness we have in the drapery, the bigger the stack back is going to be, or the size of the stack when the drapery is open. In ripple fold, the most popular fullnesses are 60, 80, 100, and 120% fullness. A 60% fullness is going to have less folds and hang a little bit more flat, and 100 or 120% is going to have more folds and look a little bit more luxe or a little bit more rich. For example, behind me we have a 60, an 80, and a 100% fullness. Now it might not look very different on camera, but in person you can really see the difference. For example, we have 7 folds here, 6 folds here, and 5 on this one. That 60% again is going to be a little bit more full, a little bit less rich, and the 100 is going to give us that really voluminous look that we're going for. The other really important thing to consider when we're talking about ripple fold is the depth of the snap. So with ripple fold snap spacing, that's one of the other major components when we're doing a ripple fold drapery. There are basically two types. There's a 4-inch and a 6-inch. A 4-inch is going to be less deep. As you can see, I can put my whole fist in here, compared to a 6-inch where I can put my entire arm inside the folds. Now, where we would use a 6-inch snap is typically with double height or longer drapery, or if we want to use a sheer but achieve a little bit more privacy because we have a bigger depth or more space between the glass and the front of the drapery. The 4-inch snap would be considered industry standard. The 6-inch snap is a little bit more specialty because it requires more fabric. However, if we're doing drapery at 10, 12, 15, or even 20 feet tall, it's nice to have those bigger, deeper folds to prevent the drapery from splaying. Okay, so let's talk about drapery hardware. Now, to keep things simple, we can really think about it two ways. With drapery hardware, there's basically track systems and rod systems. The one behind me is a track system. Tracks can be mounted on the wall or are more typically mounted at the ceiling, and there's a lot of different profiles, KS and CS and DS. That's for another time. What's really nice with this system is it allows you to do large spans of drapery and have it easily flow past the brackets. Something that's really neat, we can actually get paint match tracks that match the ceiling paint color, or we can even get them recessed and mud in where they're flush with the drywall. The other thing that's really nice with the track system is it works for blackouts because the ceiling mount track actually has a tighter gap to the ceiling. So if you're doing a blackout drapery, the light gaps are tighter. And if you're doing shears, it gives you that beautiful full height effect that you're looking for. As I mentioned, with track systems, they operate really smoothly and glide along the track on the ceiling. So if we're not doing a track system, the other option is to do a decorator rod or a rod system. Again, keep in mind, you can do either one, wall mount or ceiling mount. But typically, when we're doing a rod system, it's a wall mount application. What's great with the decorator rod or the rod systems is they come in a variety of different metal finishes, can also be paint matched in the same way that tracks can. And the other thing that's really nice is we can even add some jewelry or some bling, what's called a finial, on the end of the rod. Decorator rods come in a variety of different profiles and different diameters. They can be 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 2 inches. They can be round or they can be square. There's a variety of different brackets. And it's a little bit more of an aesthetic feature because it stands out when compared to track systems. In both tracks and rods, when we're doing an operable drapery, which means that it's opening and closing fully over a span or over the window, we're trying to find something that has a channel typically because we want it to be free flowing. When we do grommets, where there's a ring that's sewn into the drapery and the rod is inserted, or when we're doing rings, we typically don't recommend that style for fully operable draperies because while it's beautiful, it's not as functional when we're going over a large span. So last but certainly not least, when we're talking about drapery, the fabric is gonna matter. There are a lot of different styles and a lot of different materials out there when it comes to drapery fabric, but the big, most popular categories would be linens, cottons, bouclés, chenilles, upholsteries, voiles, satins, silks, and polyesters. Now keep in mind, there are a lot more. Those are just some of the most popular styles. Each one of those materials is going to have a different application. A silk, a satin, or a velvet are going to be a little bit more luxe, a little bit more rich, opalescent, shiny, glam. Whereas linens, cottons, and bouclés are going to have more of a natural feel, a little bit more organic and a little bit more textural. And there's a wide spectrum in between. Some of the other key features to consider when we're talking about drapery fabrics are the hand, which means literally the way that the drapery feels to your hand to the touch. Is it soft? Is it smooth? Or is it rough and stiff? Another one of the major things to consider when we're talking about drapery fabric is the abrasions or the double rubs. And that is what helps determine if it can be used multi-purpose, which means it can be used for drapery and upholstery, or if it should only be used for drapery. The higher the double rubs, the better that fabric is going to stand up under the test of time if you're sitting on it on a sofa or on a bench cushion. Now, some fabric can be used for both, which is really cool if you want to have a bench cushion and a drapery or a Roman shade to all match together. So where the width of a material comes into play is in determining the total number of cuts or yardage that we're going to need. It's especially important when we're talking about shears. If we have a shear material that's only 54 inches wide, but let's say the ceiling height is 10 feet, we're going to have a seam. If we can find a shear material that's 130, 145, or 160 inches in length, now we can do that entire run without having to have a seam visible in the shear. So as we mentioned at the beginning, drapery can be extremely complex. There are a lot of different factors, there are a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different materials to consider. Ultimately, it comes down to a few key principles. We want to think about our opacity, shear, semi-shear, semi-opaque, or blackout. We want to think about the way that we're hanging it. Are we doing on a track system? Are we doing on a rod system? We want to think about our fullness and our pleats. Are we doing ripple fold? Are we doing pinch pleat? How full or how much volume do we want in the drapery? And then what type of fabric are we going to use? Check out a few of our favorite projects.